Hi everybody, welcome back and welcome to video 2 on guided journaling. I'm Dr. Neil Neimark, board certified family physician and founder of the Academy of Stress Mastery, where we teach you how to use a pen and a piece of paper instead of just pills to reduce your stress and reclaim your health, happiness, and peace of mind. Now, this is the second video in our 3-part series on how you can use guided journaling as an effective and powerful tool for stress reduction, greater happiness, and more fulfillment in life. But let me just give you a review of some of what we've already learned. Now remember, in my experience, the main benefit of being skilled in using guided journaling is that it becomes a powerful tool for self-reflection and character development. And this will bring you more peace of mind, joy in your relationships, purpose and direction in life, strength of character, and freedom from depression, stress, and pain. Now that's a list of really amazing benefits. Just think about that. Now, just to review what guided journaling is, remember it is the process of writing your thoughts, feelings, wants, and needs down on paper, not in a random fashion, but rather in response to specific questions or sentence stems or guided processes that really actually guide your writing in a way that takes you from emotional pain, stress, or confusion to a place of clarity and understanding. Now, what's so special about guided journaling? You know, what happens in life is that sometimes just dumping your anger, hurt, or frustration onto the written page only gets you lost more deeply in your emotions. Now, effective guided journaling is like having your very own therapist there every step of the way, guiding you to greater clarity, resolution, and resilience. I mean, let's face it, life's problems are often complex and they go multiple levels deep. And without some guidance, you can easily get lost in all of the emotional confusion. So let me review what we learned last video on the guided feeling journaling example. Remember, I gave you the personal example of my son Chris and he had done something that really upset me when he was a teenager, and I yelled at him without completely understanding the circumstances behind his actions. Now, my wife heard the encounter, and she knew the details behind what had happened, and she got upset with me for not being more understanding with Chris. Well, the whole situation upset me, and remember how I worked through it with the guided feeling technique. There are the 4 big questions. 1, what am I feeling right now? And in this case, I felt angry and upset and unappreciated by my wife. Number 2, what event led me to feel this way? Well, in this case, it was my wife getting upset with me because I scolded our son too quickly without taking his circumstances into account. Question number 3, how do I wish things had gone? Well, really, I wish that my wife would have been totally supportive of me and how I handled the situation, and that she would think I'm the greatest husband and father on the planet. Now remember, this is what Ken Keyes calls our addictive demand or our fantasy. And question number 4, if things had gone the way I wanted them to, what would I be feeling right now? Well, this is called our positive intention. And my positive intention in this case is to feel loved and appreciated for being a good father and a good husband. So how do we get our positive intention met even when our fantasy or our addictive demand doesn't get met? And that's the main question here. Is there a way that on the inside, in my inner experience, is there a way I can allow myself to feel the love and appreciation that I need even though my wife is upset with me? In other words, even though she didn't satisfy my fantasy of her totally supporting me in the moment and then just filling me in later on the things I didn't know. So yes, of course there's a way to get our positive intention met, and it has to do, in this specific case, I can realize that my wife being upset with me is only temporary, and it doesn't mean she doesn't love and appreciate me. The problem is that in the moment of my emotional upset, my brain is emotionally hijacked by my emotions. In other words, I can't think clearly because my emotions have hijacked my reason. And in that moment, it doesn't feel like she really supports me. But in truth, when I take a moment to think about it, I can realize that her upset with me is really only temporary, and it doesn't mean she doesn't love me because she corrected me in this situation. Now, I can also come to realize that I can't control my wife's response to me. The only thing I can control is my response to the situation. So then what do? Remember when we learned this guided journaling in the last video, we now have to take our new insights back into the relationship because that's where all growth happens. So now that I've been able to soothe myself emotionally and get my positive intention met, in other words, allow myself to reconnect to my own worthiness as a good father and a good husband, now I have a responsibility for my healing and for that of my wife and my son to take those insights and address them with my wife and, of course, my son by taking the following 3 actions. I can ask for what I want, I have to accept what I get, and number 3, work on the difference. So moving on now, after that quick review of what we learned in the guided feeling journaling, I want to explain that in my own personal medical practice and through our work at the Academy of Stress Mastery, I've used this technique of journaling to empower people across the spectrum how to reduce their stress and improve their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health using the safe, drug-free, and powerfully effective technique of guided journaling. To put it simply, journaling is a powerful stress reduction tool. What does guided journaling actually do for us? That's the important understanding that I want to bring to you. Journaling helps us in a number of ways based on the research. Number 1, it helps us to process difficult emotions. This is called emotional disclosure or emotional release. Number 2, it helps us to overcome our negative thoughts and limiting beliefs. This is something we call cognitive restructuring in the literature. Number 3, it helps us to discover who we are and what we feel and what we want in life. This is called self-awareness or honest self-expression or honest self-report or self-disclosure. And finally, number 4, guided journaling helps us to be true to ourselves. In other words, this is what we call congruency in the literature. But how does journaling really help us? This man here is Dr. James Pennebaker, one of the leading pioneers and researchers in the power of journaling. And what he says in this quote from him from his book Opening Up, The Healing Power of Expressing Emotions, is that journaling helps us find meaning in complicated life circumstances. Writing helps to reconstruct painful thoughts and images into a story or narrative. Once we give an upsetting event some degree of structure with a clear beginning, middle, and an end, we are better able to move past it. I want to talk a little bit about how I became interested in guided journaling because I think my experience may help you connect to ways that you can use guided journaling in your own life. The situation is that during my internship year, I had become physically ill and clinically depressed because of an inability to know how to process all the emotional pain and stress I was going through at the time. And it was really this personal struggle with my illness and depression that led me to discover certain powerful guided journaling techniques that helped me process my emotional stress so that I would never again have to suffer that same fate of physical illness and depression, at least not without having a fighting chance to protect myself from the ravages of excess emotional stress, physical strain, and a lack of social connectedness. Well, let me tell you a little bit more about my story. At the time, I was 26 years old, and I had just graduated from medical school at the Ohio State University College of Medicine. And I moved to Baltimore, Maryland to begin a grueling year of internship. Everybody in medicine knows how difficult that first internship year is. Well, I knew it would be tough, and it was every bit as difficult as I had expected, but I really had no idea what was about to happen to me. Overwhelmed by the rigors of 100-hour work weeks and being up every third night on call and never having any downtime, I really had become homesick and just worn down. Now, I was a positive thinker, so I was able to push myself through as best I could, and I kept hoping things would turn around, but it didn't seem to be working in my favor. I mean, I made new friends, and I definitely missed my old friends. I didn't feel that sense of connection that I did with my old friends, with my new friends. Now, my new friends were great, it's true, but it's not the same as having those long-term old friends that really knew and understood me. So I did feel isolated and alone. And in my third month of internship, my world came crashing down. One morning, I woke up exhausted in a state of deep sadness and despair. I had just finished a night on call, hardly getting anything but more than like an hour of sleep. I looked down at the time on my beeper. Yes, we had beepers back then, and they had a little clock on them. That's how I knew what time it was. And I thought of the day ahead, and I tell you, I was depressed. I mean, tears began to fall from my eyes. I thought of the day ahead, and I just realized, wow, I don't have it in me to make it through this. I mean, I tried to get up, I tried to go to work, but I just couldn't get myself out of that bedroom. I could not get myself to move. I mean, I was overwhelmed, and I felt completely unable to function. In addition to this, of course, I was embarrassed by what others were going to think of me sitting here. And I was sure my fellow residents and interns, someone would come in the room and see me just kind of losing it and cracking up. And I felt, wow, what is wrong with me? I just felt horrible that I couldn't get myself to go to work. I had a place I had to be, and I felt guilty, and I definitely felt weak inside, but I couldn't get myself to go and show up at that rotation. I mean, I had experienced sadness and aloneness before, but this time I just couldn't talk myself out of it. I could not just be positive. I couldn't motivate myself. I couldn't pick myself up by the bootstraps like I usually could. I mean, I felt helpless, and I knew I needed some help. So I called my residency director, and he told me to come over to the clinic where he was, and he examined me, and he looked at me, and he talked to me, and he did some tests, and he diagnosed me with a bad case of infectious mono, and it had affected my liver and caused what we call inflammatory hepatitis. And my director reassured me that this is probably what caused my depression. But I tell you what, I knew it wasn't true. Intuitively, I knew the opposite was true. I mean, I had felt unhappy, alone, and isolated, and emotionally empty for a while. And I was sure that this is what made me ill and susceptible to contracting the monovirus. Now, I know they say it's the kissing disease, but I promise you, I hadn't been kissing anybody that year. I was working so hard. Well, after 1 week, my illness got worse, and I ended up having to be admitted to the hospital. And this unhappiness and loneliness that had made me ill also landed me in the hospital. But ironically enough, being in that hospital was the first time during my whole internship that I really felt nurtured and cared for. I mean, the nurses were incredible. They had this smile, this healing touch. They cared about me. And I hadn't experienced that up till now. It was just work, 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 and other residents with that sort of cutthroat attitude. But while in the hospital, I remember for the first time feeling cared for and nurtured. And man, especially before bedtime, the nurses back then, they'd come and give you like a powder, soft powder rub on your back, and they'd rub your back for a little and your neck, and just that touch was healing. And I realized how starving I was for some kind of connection, to be touched, physically, but also emotionally by somebody who cared for me. And it's at that point that I realized I'd been literally starving to be touched, both physically and emotionally. Well, I spent a week in the hospital and I was well enough to be discharged, but it really took me another 6 weeks or so to get physically recovered from the mono. And during this time, I left my apartment on the hospital residency campus, and fortunately had some really close friends, Rabbi Mitch and his wife Sherry Wolberg, who lived in Baltimore. So I was able to call them up and say, hey guys, my life is in chaos. Is there any way you can help me? And they were so incredible. Their 2 kids at the time were just young at the time, and they invited me to their house to come stay as long as I wanted. And that's when I became emotionally connected again to the things that meant something to me, to people that were, powerfully important in my life. And I remember no longer feeling so alone and isolated. And I brought my guitar with me. It was a long-held love of mine. It's always how I really connected to my sort of spiritual inner core. And I was able to sit and just play guitar and think about things. And I just really took the time to reevaluate my life. And I tell you, I was so discouraged and disillusioned with my medical training. I really struggled with the possibility of leaving medicine. There seemed to be no humanity to me, no connection to soulful things that were so important in my life. I mean, the grueling hours and the sleepless nights felt like a form of fraternity hazing at best. And I thought to myself, how can we teach patients balance in their physical and emotional and spiritual lives when we were brutalized by the very lack of it ourselves, with inhumane call schedules, sleep deprivation, and these endless hours of scut work? Well, I was beset by the hypocrisy, to say the least. And did it make us better physicians to deny for ourselves the very health advice we were encouraged to give our patients? I just couldn't understand that. And I knew I went into medicine because I longed to make a difference in people's lives. And I love science, but I also love the human soul, the inner core of life, what it was all about, the deeper meaning and purpose of life. I love people, and I was fascinated with the spiritual side of things. And I also love science and was fascinated with the human body. And I dreamt of being the kind of doctor who could offer patients not just the power of science, which was incredible, but also the power of caring, compassion, and love. So as I began to recover, I really made a decision in my life. I was determined not to let myself ever feel so isolated and alone again as I did those first 3 months of my internship. And I made a concerted effort to stay in close touch with friends and family. And after a lot of consultation with loved ones and my parents and my friends and Rabbi and Sherry, I decided to finish my internship. And then after I completed the year, I would let myself take a break for a year or two and just think about the deeper issues in life that were important to me. So I spent a lot of time, as you can imagine, looking back and trying to figure out what happened to me, how my world came crashing down. Why did I become physically ill and depressed? Well, clearly the inordinate stresses of that year had a lot to do with it. There was excessive physical demands, emotional stress, no doubt about it. The feeling of being alone and homesick was a big contributing factor. And I missed a strong connection to people who knew and loved me. I mean, I did feel isolated. And I had some good friends, but there's something about having those lifelong friends who really understand you at the deep core level that I just didn't experience there. And clearly, extensive research now shows the vital importance of love and social support in maintaining health and well-being. But there's one more thing, as I look back, that played a giant role in why I became ill that year. And this was a cherished belief, what I call the number one lie, that I held on to from my personal experience that led me into stress and isolation. And that is, if I just think positive, everything will be okay. Now, hardly anyone can debate the importance of positive thinking. We all know that it's important. But I really misunderstood the concept to believe that I shouldn't even acknowledge or admit any negative thoughts or feelings. I felt that admitting any negativity or fears meant that I was complaining or weak, or I just wasn't good enough or strong enough. And what happened is I chose to be positive at the expense of being emotionally honest with myself. I really failed to reveal my true feelings, and that led me to feeling isolated and living a lie. That lie being that if I just think positive, everything else will be okay, that's all it takes. I realized that because I didn't reveal myself to others, and because I thought it was so negative to express my anger or my insecurity or my fear or my disappointments in life, I couldn't let others really into my heart. I couldn't let them see who I really was. And I took a lot of energy to keep myself from revealing that because I thought it would make me appear weak or somehow unworthy. And it's in that failure that I isolated myself. After all, how could others really know what I felt when I was afraid to express my true feelings? I mean, how could I let other people into my life when I didn't allow myself to become vulnerable? That's how we connect to one another, through our vulnerabilities. Now, granted, you have to be careful about who you're vulnerable to, and some people will take advantage of that. But it's not as a policy. You just can't do that all the time. And it was the pain of that limiting beliefs that I held that really propelled me on this journey of self-discovery. And what I clearly learned in this journey is that life requires not a simple positive thinking, but a mature positive thinking, a realistic positive thinking that comes from a willingness to openly face our long-held fears, our negative beliefs, and our judgmental attitudes. It's this mature, positive thinking that actually encourages us to face our negativities, our fears, our insecurities. That's how we become vulnerable and grow. I mean, after all, without this acknowledgement, without this ownership or vulnerability, the negativity is simply denied and it's pushed underground, where it sprouts up later as illness or disease. You know, I love this humorous Woody Allen quote. I give it in a lot of my talks, which paraphrase goes like this: "Hey, I never allow myself to get angry. I just keep it inside and grow a tumor instead." So you see that accepting our imperfections and being vulnerable is what opens us up to the healing. And simple positive thinking alone will not keep us well. It's emotional honesty and the expression of what's true in our heart that results in the greatest healing. I mean, studies show that the honest expression of emotion, whether it's negative like fear, anger, resentment, or jealousy, or positive like happiness, peacefulness, joy, and laughter, results in an increase in the number and activity of natural killer cells. So it's important to understand that negative thinking will not necessarily make us ill, any more than simple positive thinking will keep us well. It's emotional honesty that allows us to realize our blessings. You know, there is a danger to our body and our spirit in repressing anger and resentment in the guise of being positive. There's also a danger to our body and our spirit in the inappropriate dumping or overexpression of anger, resentment, and hostility onto others. But there is a middle ground of emotional honesty where we're neither dumping nor repressing. We're neither dwelling on negativity nor denying it. And it's that emotional honesty that allows us to realize our blessings even as we acknowledge the fear, pain, sadness, and loss that is inherent in a full and vital life. And this emotional honesty that requires such courage really represents the true voyage of self-discovery. And it's exemplified in the term that Joseph Campbell coined called the hero's journey. And it's emotional honesty that demands the ability to see ourselves as we are, with our limitations, our ugliness, our pettiness, and our negativity included, without apology and without pretense. But emotional honesty also demands the ability to see ourselves as we may be in all our glorious potential, without apology and without pretense. Marcel Proust, the great writer, once said the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And this is the voyage of emotional honesty. To be able to see ourselves with new eyes that refuse to deny the truth of our frailties and humanness, and eyes that refuse to deny the innocence, strength, courage, and love that lie within each and every one of us. Emotional honesty is the skill I lacked during my internship. I was kind and I was caring and I was a positive person, but I didn't have that level of emotional honesty that opened me up to be able to really connect with others, and more importantly, allow them to connect to me and to soothe some of my pain and difficulties, as we all do for one another. So to simultaneously acknowledge our frailty and our might is truly healing. My belief in positive thinking, though well-intentioned, prevented me from expressing my discontent and disappointment in a way that I could feel positive and connected to other people as well as to my own ideas. And my belief prevented me from being real, honest, and emotionally available for love and commitment and community. It is that belief in simple positive thinking that said that negativity is bad and shouldn't be even acknowledged that kept me feeling isolated and alone. And I've come to understand over the last 30 years since I completed that internship that acknowledging negative beliefs is critical for healing. That the honest expression of our emotion, whether positive or negative, is what leads us to live healthier, happier, and more joyous lives. And I'm firmly convinced that by discovering and acknowledging our negative beliefs, we can then work to eliminate those beliefs, and in their place, we can choose and cultivate new, positive, and empowering beliefs. And this is how we can heal our isolation, minimize illness, and achieve a greater sense of emotional happiness, mental calm, and spiritual well-being in our lives. Negative beliefs aren't bad. Both positive and negative beliefs can heal us. They both help us to grow. Positive beliefs can engender hope and possibility, and that engages and activates our healing system. But negative beliefs heal us in the feedback they provide. In some ways, suffering the consequences of our negative or disempowering beliefs is what leads us to grow and change. Sometimes when I'm in pain and struggling with an issue in my life, I confide in my dear friend and mentor, Rick Neimark, who often says tongue-in-cheek, and he gives me that look, "Neil, may God grant you more suffering." And then he smiles, and he tells me not to take myself so seriously, because he knows that our suffering often empowers us to give up our limiting beliefs and allows us to find greater love, honesty, and compassion in our lives. So take it the right way when I say to you, may God grant you more suffering. The soulful poet and author Robert Bly speaks eloquently in his book Iron John of a scene where a young boy dips his wounded finger into a stream in order to soothe its aching. Now, when the boy pulls this finger from the stream, the tip turns to gold. And it's this symbolism that suggests that our gold is where our wound is. And that means that our deepest treasure, our deepest gifts, come from the place where we are most wounded. And this has certainly been true in my life, and I'm certain that it's true in most of yours. And as healers, we must all walk into our woundedness in order to truly heal ourselves and help heal others. And I tell you all my story now, and I hope it's been encouraging to you, not to bemoan my ignorance or to look back and criticize myself for all the things I might have done differently, but I wanted to share my own story of woundedness with all of you as the gift that it's been in my life. Because I have to tell you, without my own suffering, I really never would have achieved the level of awareness and sensitivity that I now have as a doctor of how emotional and spiritual issues can so dramatically affect our physical health and our mental and spiritual well-being. And journaling is a way for all of us to tell our stories of our own unique woundedness. And we have to do that not from a place of regret, but from a place of compassion, which is a measure of our ability to understand the lack of understanding. You know, when we share our pain, we increase our treasure, we increase our gold, and we join each other in a common humanity and an honesty that allows us to address our fears, frustrations, and hurts. And in this way, we are all at last empowered to help make the world a kinder, more loving, just, and beautiful place in which to live. And in this way, it becomes a garden of goodness, if you will, where God's very presence can dwell among us. Now, I wish you well on your voyage of self-discovery. And I want to thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it gives you an idea of just how passionate I am about helping everyone I can to avoid some of the unnecessary suffering that I went through that year, almost 30 years ago. And though there are many tools available, far and away from me, the most powerful tool I've ever found to help myself and my patients grow in wisdom, character, and contribution has been the tool of guided journaling. So listen, that's it for today. I want you to keep your eyes on your email box for the third and final video, which will be coming in a few days. And in this video, I'll explain to you some of the other powerful journaling techniques available to help you in your personal healing journey. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this talk has been powerful for you and helpful for you, and I look forward to seeing you on the third and final video in the next few days. Take care now.